So, we've come a long way in our country where like everything is embraced as legitimate now. And so I like to go back and I look at, here's the founding of our country based on Christian principles. There were many revivals and great awakenings that were taking place, and the gospel really was a big part of our American heritage. It's not anymore. Like I said, we're embracing everything, including those things that you're talking about, those false supernatural things.
Yeah.
So when did that begin? When was the inception of the deception?
A lot of times we tend to think that in our culture, in our country right now, we are in the most deceptive time of all. And there certainly could be an argument for that, but it's not the first time. Because if you look back at, let's say, the early 1800s, okay, so we were getting a bit complacent. Church membership was way down. We tend to think of those times as, oh, well, everybody went to church. That comes in waves in our country, in our culture. So there was a time, early 1800s, for instance, when we were not where we should have been, having been a country based on Christian Judeo principles. Mm-hmm. So along comes the Second Great Awakening, and that brought things back a bit. But there were still times in that early 1800 time where, boy, we were way off the track from where this country was founded. So, as I point out in my book, there's a chapter in my book about this. There were some things that had come along that had really brought into question in people's minds and in our culture those Christian principles. For instance, one thing was the Enlightenment, which in many angles of that, they did not see, as the Enlightenment made waves in our country, people were like, well, maybe we don't need God, right? Maybe he's not the God of the Bible, and so on. Mm-hmm. Another thing was the Industrial Revolution had come along and changed everything, was beginning to change everything. All kinds of new mechanisms and new ways of communication and so on. So here's what happened. Here's the point. In 1848, there were two little girls in Hydeville, New York, who pulled a little trick on their mother. And long story short, it looks as though they were communicating with the dead, and their mother believed it. It was a trick. And in my book, I go into the details of what it was. But that little deception turned into one of the biggest religious waves in this country. A lot of people don't know that, but there was a new religion that spawned out of these two little girls and their tricks. It was called spiritualism. Millions of Americans gravitated from Christianity to spiritualism. What was spiritualism? Basically, it was a belief that you could communicate with the dead. It was very, very unbiblical, obviously, at that level, but on many other levels as well. Huge wave. Mary Todd Lincoln, President Lincoln's wife, was a spiritualist. Mm-hmm. They had seances in the White House. President Lincoln did attend some of them, although he went after one of these mediums and had him exposed and kicked out of the White House. But that's how pernicious and how prevalent spiritualism was in our country. Along comes then the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Thousands and thousands of young men dying. Guess what? That gave a new wave to spiritualism, to the deception, because people, Mary Todd Lincoln being one of them, wanted to contact their dead boys. And because of the fear that had just taken over our country at that time, people were willing and they were open to deception. There's a very dear friend of mine who's a magician. His name's Dan Coram. He's an author. And I asked him one time, I said, what is the most difficult person to deceive? And here's what he said. I thought, boy, I got to write this one down. And I talk about him in my book. He said, the most difficult person to deceive is the person who loves the truth more than they fear their pain. And that's profound.
Yeah, I need to write that down. That's a good one.
Yeah, pain's a pretty motivating factor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is. And it
Yeah.
opens you up to deception because why? You'll do anything to get rid of that fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a motivator in a bad way.
Yeah.
This has been a sample of No Apology with Emilee and Chris. For full episodes and other content, go to our website, freshroadmedia.com. And thank you for sharing and subscribing.